You know, when you start looking into different topics, sometimes you find these really surprising connections, right?
Definitely.
And based on the sources you share, you've really hit on a fascinating one, the woolly mammoth and the Neanderthal.
Yeah,
There's this unexpected shared ground.
absolutely. And the material you sent covers, well, quite a range from, their final days to the really cutting edge science, looking at maybe bringing them back.
It really does. So our mission today, pulling directly from what you've sent us, is to unpack the big insights, the really kind of mind-blowing stuff about what links these two populations, and also, importantly, where their stories really diverge, both in the past with their extinction and maybe in the future.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's get into it. The first big thing, obviously highlighted in the materials, extinction, their shared fate.
Right. Looking at the information provided, it's clear both are, well, gone, no longer with us. But the timing, that's quite different. And that's, I think, a really key point. Well, woolly mammoths, they actually hung on until relatively recently, geologically speaking. They vanished around, what, 4,000 years ago?
Yeah, that's surprisingly recent when you think about it. And the reasons
Yeah.
your sources pointed towards.
Yeah, the prevailing theory seemed to be a combination. Climate change, definitely, but also, crucially, human hunting.
Right, so like an environmental pressure cooker plus direct human impact. That's what the reading suggests.
Yeah.
Okay, and Neanderthals.
Much, much earlier. They disappeared roughly 40,000 years ago, so a huge gap there.
Wow, yeah. 40,000 versus 4,000, and the reasons for their disappearance. Bit fuzzier, maybe?
A bit more complex, it seems. Your sources suggest it likely involved competition with modern humans.
Yeah.
With us.
Us showing up on the scene.
Pretty much, and possibly environmental shifts playing a role, too. So, yeah, a huge difference in when they went extinct, but the same ultimate outcome.
That massive time gap. It really hints at maybe different kinds of pressures, doesn't it? Like the mammoths faced a world already being shaped more heavily by humans and climate shifts, while Neanderthals, maybe it was more about that direct interaction, that competition.
That seems like a crucial distinction, yeah. And, as your sources also point out, even though they're gone, they haven't completely vanished. Not in every sense.
Ah, okay. You mean the genetic legacy.
Exactly. Both left behind something genetic that, well, keeps scientists busy and, like you said, forms the basis for some really interesting possibilities down the line.
This is where, based on the material, gets really interesting, I thought. For mammoths, we have actual DNA, right? Preserved in frozen remains. Siberia, places like that.
Yeah, it's incredible, like these genetic time capsules the sources talk about. The permafrost preservation is key.
Amazing. And for Neanderthals, we don't have like whole frozen Neanderthals, do we?
No, not like the mammoths. But their DNA, it actually persists within us, within modern human populations.
Right, I saw that in the reading. The study's showing, what, 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA in people outside of Africa?
That's the figure, yeah. A clear sign that our ancestors and Neanderthals interbred.
So different ways their genetics survive, but still present.
Very much so. It's kind of wild to think we can still access their DNA after all this time. It tells you something about how robust genetic information can be.
It really does. Which, okay, brings us to the part that I know caught your eye in these articles. De-extinction, the potential return. Because we have this recoverable DNA for both. They become candidates, right? At least theoretically.
That's the idea. Looking at the mammoth information you found, scientists, and especially this company, Colossal Biosciences, they're actively pursuing it, what they often call de-extinction.
And how are they trying to do it? It's not quite Jurassic Park, is it?
No, not exactly. The main strategy is genetic engineering, using tools like CRISPR to edit the genomes of Asian elephants, their closest living relatives.
Editing elephant DNA. To do what?
To insert those key genetic traits that made mammoths, well, mammoths, the things your sources describe.
Like the thick fur, the fat layers, the ability to handle extreme cold, that sort of stuff.
Precisely. Using CRISPR's precision makes targeting specific genes much more feasible than, say, older genetic techniques.
Okay. But Neanderthals, that's a whole different ballgame, ethically speaking. That came through loud and clear in the material.
Oh, absolutely. Huge difference. While, theoretically you can maybe talk about editing human stem cells to express Neanderthal traits, the ethical hurdles are just immense.
We're talking potential human cloning territory, aren't we?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And there are very firm legal and ethical lines drawn around that globally. Big red flag.
Okay, so let's dig into the methods a bit more, based on your research. For mammoths, It's mainly CRISPR gene editing on elephant DNA.
That's the primary approach, yeah. Colossal Biosciences, as we mentioned, their stated goal is pretty ambitious, producing a hybrid mammoth-elephant calf by 2028, I think.
Wow, that's soon. And how would that work? The calf.
The idea is that these calves would be carried by elephant surrogates, Asian elephant mothers.
Right, okay. Ambitious is the word. Now, what about straight-up cloning, inserting DNA into an egg? Did your sources mention that much?
They did touch on it. Cloning is much more challenging, especially for mammoths. The DNA you recover, even from permafrost, is often degraded, fragmented. Getting a complete, usable blueprint is tough.
But maybe getting better with some of those really well-preserved tissue finds.
Possibly. Those offer the best hope for higher quality samples, for sure. But still, a huge challenge. And for Neanderthals, well, cloning faces the same technical issues, plus those massive ethical barriers we just talked about. Even bigger hurdles.
Makes sense. And backbreeding. Selectively breeding modern animals to bring out old traits. Was that relevant here?
Not so much according to the materials you looked at. It's been tried for things like aurochs, trying to recreate them from cattle breeds. But for mammoths, the genetic distance to elephants is pretty large. And for Neanderthals, well, forget it, for all the ethical reasons.
Right. Okay. So, given these methods, where do things actually stand? What's the current status based on your reading? Any actual progress?
Well, on the mammoth front, Colossal is definitely the main player. They've raised a lot of money. You mentioned the $200 million figure earlier.
Yeah.
And their vision goes beyond just creating a few animals. They talk about reintroducing these hybrids into Arctic ecosystems.
Why? What's the goal there?
The idea, as explained in your sources, is ecological engineering almost. That these large grazers could help maintain the tundra grasslands, maybe slow down permafrost thaw, which is a huge climate concern.
Huh. Interesting angle. But it sounds like there are still big challenges.
Ooh, major hurdles remain. Getting the pregnancies to work successfully in elephant surrogates, that's a big one.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, understanding the actual ecological impact if they were reintroduced. It's complex.
Yeah, you can't just drop a mammoth-like creature into the Arctic and hope for the best, I guess. You'd have to consider how it fits.
Exactly. And what about Neanderthals? Did you find any active projects, any labs trying to,
No. Based on the information provided, absolutely not. There are no active projects aiming to revive Neanderthals. The ethical lines are just too bright. Consent, human rights, is just off the table.
So the research on Neanderthal DNA is purely about understanding it?
Yes. It's focused on studying the Neanderthal DNA that exists in modern humans, learning what it does, how it might affect things like our immune systems, maybe even cognition. It's about understanding our own history, our genetic heritage, not recreating an extinct human relative.
Got it. So this brings up some pretty fundamental questions, doesn't it? Beyond just the can we technically do it part, what are the big concerns that jumped out from your reading?
Well, technically, getting complete DNA is still a massive issue, especially for Neanderthals where it's super fragmented, right?
Definitely. Even with mammoths, where preservation can be better, there are still gaps. They have to sort of patch it together using the elephant genome as a reference.
And the reliance on elephant surrogates for the Mammoth project. That raises animal welfare questions, I imagine.
For sure. That's a significant ethical consideration noted in the review, the well-being of the surrogate mothers.
And thinking ecologically again about the mammoths.
The impact on current ecosystems is a big one. Your materials likely highlighted that. What happens when you introduce or reintroduce a large herbivore like that? Could it disrupt things?
Could it have unforeseen consequences for plants, other animals?
Exactly. And does the grazing theory for combating permafrost melt actually hold water at scale? Would it cause other problems? I mean, were there dissenting views on this in what you read?
That's a critical point. So, okay, stepping back, why even do this? What's the main motivation behind de-extinction efforts that you found?
There seem to be a few drivers coming through in the research. One is conservation or maybe restoration, the idea that revived species could help fix ecosystems.
Like the mammoth grazing on the tundra idea.
Right, that fits there. Another big one is just scientific advancement, pushing the boundaries of genomics, gene editing. That technology has spin-offs for medicine, biology in general.
So the tech development itself is valuable.
Potentially, yes. And then there's, well, maybe a cultural element, a fascination with these lost worlds. Curiosity.
Yeah, mammoths are iconic Ice Age animals.
Yeah.
And Neanderthals, our closest extinct relatives. They capture the imagination.
They really do, though, of course, critics argue that the money and effort might be better spent saving species that are endangered now. That's a valid counterpoint raised.
A fair point.
Yeah.
Okay, so wrapping this section up, pulling together the information you gave us, what's the key difference in the revival prospects for mammoths versus Neanderthals?
The biggest takeaway, I think, has to be how close to reality each one is. Mammoth revival. It's an active project. There's serious money, a stated goal, ongoing work. It's, happening.
Whereas Neanderthal revival.
Remains purely speculative, almost science fiction territory, really, because the ethical constraints are just so profound. Recreating a human or a human relative, that's the major block.
So, okay, to summarize our deep dive into your sources, both mammoths and Neanderthals met their end. They went extinct. But they left these genetic echoes.
Footprints in time.
That scientists are now decoding. And this recoverable DNA makes both, in theory, candidates for de-extinction. But the reality, worlds apart.
Completely.
The mammoths are sort of taxiing down the runway, maybe, while Neanderthal revival is still firmly parked in the hangar, probably indefinitely, due to those ethical walls.
That's a good way to put it. Your sources definitely paint that divergent picture.
So, thinking about everything you explored in these materials, here's a final thought to leave folks with. When you consider the technology, the potential, but also these vastly different ethical landscapes, where do you think de-extinction might be heading? What does this whole push to maybe bring back the past tell us, about our relationship with life's history, and maybe the future we're trying to shape?